Life is beautiful, you are beautiful. Life is beautiful, we are beautiful too.
All right.
Let's do it.
Welcome.
I'm happy to be here.
The Daniel Carcillo journey. We're back. I've got Mike Hart here, ready to go clinic, correct?
That's right.
Instead of me butchering it, why don't you introduce yourself to my following?
Sure. So my name is Mike Hart. I'm a family doctor, originally from St. John's, Newfoundland, but live in London, Ontario right now. Name of my clinic is Ready to Go Clinic. And as Dan said, I'm here to chat mostly about cannabis and, whatever kind of comes up.
Nice. And London, the home of the London Knights.
Home of the London Knights.
My biggest rival with the Sting.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
You lost them a few times?
Yeah, and just the new rink and being so close together, there were always some heated battles. Yeah.
And London's got the big rink, too.
Big rink. Yeah,
big rink.
No doubt. Like, what, 8,000, 9,000
I think it's like
seater?
10,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. So doubles the size of Sarnia.
Yeah, and probably even bigger than some other rinks.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, yeah. And it's top class. Top class there. Yeah. Sponsored by Labatt.
Plug in London.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, yeah, right? Unreal. How did we first meet? We connected on social.
Yeah.
And then I remember our first conversation, you were talking about there was some synergies with Chicago and the Blackhawks, and
Yeah, so it's hilarious. Like anyone watching this knows that I've always been like a diehard Blackhawks fan my whole life. I was in the building when you guys won the cup. The whole thing. Like my whole family's Blackhawks fans. So yeah, just like anytime I connect with an ex-Blackhawk, it's always a little bit extra. So it's good. It's good.
Man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we'll keep it extra.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, man. So yeah, why don't we dive in, because I really want to cannabis. I've used it since I was 16, and obviously achieved things both in school and in sport. So I think that whole misnomer of cannabis and being tied to sort of a stigma that comes along with it and comes along with the plant, being lazy and not being able to be a high operator. There's obviously a fine line between that and understanding what strains and the amounts of THC that work for you. But even just recently, in the last 9 months, I've used solventless processed CBD mixed with a 6 blend of mushrooms to recover my brain health. That was one of the main staples to recover my brain health. So I want to definitely ask about cannabis and its ability to be a neuroprotectant, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant. And I guess let's start off with why you decided to settle here in London, and then why you decided to go into being a cannabis doctor.
Sure. Well, the first one's kind of easy. I did my residency in London, and then I just kind of stayed here.
Yeah, that is simple.
But the cannabis doctor thing. So I started medicine my own in 2013. That's when I started, practicing independently. And then in 2014 in Canada, the MMPR program came out. So that made it a lot easier for physicians in Canada to prescribe cannabis. So, I knew that a lot of my patients were really struggling on opioids. I knew they were really struggling on sleeping pills. Those were kind of the two biggest ones, sort of like starting off. And I knew that, cannabis was a great alternative. And also, it can do more than one thing, which we'll, certainly get into. I mean, like it can treat pain, but it can also treat sleep. It can also treat, anxiety. So these are, different medical conditions that you can use one plant or one cannabinoid for. So, I kind of knew this, and I knew that I wanted to apply it to my practice base. So, as soon as that MMPR program came out, I got right into research on cannabis. I really offered a lot of patients in my practice cannabis, and instead of say opioids or benzodiazepines, or a lot of just like sedating drugs, say to help you sleep at night. So that's where my sort of approach was at first. Was I really want to tackle the opioids, and I really want to tackle the insomnia, and also too, just talking a little bit about my hometown in St. John's. Like at that time, and I can't say say that I've kept up with it that much since, but I know that the opioid crisis there was actually really bad in St. John's, and also too in other parts of the province. So, it was something that I knew about like growing up, and I knew that I could do something about it. And, so far, like, not just myself, but there's been so many other, doctors, people like yourself advocating for cannabis that have, helped people get off of opioids, get off of, sedating medications, insomnia medications, and using cannabis instead. And not only, using it, but also getting like better results than they were getting before. So it's not like, they're getting off it and like their pain is worse or the pain is the same. Like sometimes they, people say that it actually treats it better. So, it was just an absolute no brainer for me.
Right. And so how could that be? Maybe run people through how could cannabis be used in the form of helping you sleep, in the form of pain reduction, and why can it be more effective than these pharmaceuticals?
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about each one. So let's talk about pain reduction. So pain reduction is kind of interesting, and it's good to talk about the different cannabinoids for this because people have different types of pain, right? So we need to know a little bit about pain before we answer this question. So people have like arthritis, right? Arthritic pain. So that's like an inflammatory pain. Anything with the name itis in it or the last name itis in it, that indicates inflammation. So CBD can be really effective for that type of pain, for reducing overall inflammation, and giving people, a little bit of a break too. And the fact that a lot of people who are in pain are also having, issues with mental problems, right? And again, going back to, killing two birds with one stone, CBD can also be effective for anxiety and some of the stress that comes along with having all that pain. But again, going back to pain, but what if you have like neuropathic pain, right? Like what if you have sciatica, and some people have it down one leg, some people have it down both. So, if that's the case, oftentimes THC, I don't want to say is better, but sometimes it can be better, or sometimes it can be better used in conjunction with CBD. So meaning that the THC, part of the reason that it's effective for pain is because it causes this dissociation. And because you have this slight dissociation, you have this reduction in overall pain. And that's, something that, I try to explain to my patients sometimes who have, sciatica or neuropathic type of pain, because, they say that they use some CBD and maybe they didn't get as much relief as they were looking for. So in that case, you definitely want to move on to THC. And if the patient, which is, has an aversion to THC, which is, completely reasonable. I understand some people just don't want any psychoactivity, but we can certainly talk about, that as well later. But, if they do have an aversion to THC, you can use CBD with, a lower combination of the THC. And then that way, because you have the CBD on board, you're going to get less of the psychoactive effects from the THC, but you'll still get a lot of the pain relieving effects from the THC, and also you'll get the pain relieving effects from CBD. So that's, I think, a reasonable approach to pain overall. And then moving on to insomnia. So, a lot of people have trouble sleeping, and people don't realize, how dangerous some of these sleep drugs are. Like I remember reading this study, and I think it was in the 2013 in a British medical journal, indicating that like if you're using sleeping pills consistently, it increases your risk of death by over like threefold. And the medications that I see mostly in Ontario, and I think across North America, trazodone is a real big one. Zopiclone or Imivane is a real big one. And then, they shouldn't be, but a lot of people still prescribe all the benzodiazepines. So Ativan, Xanax, clonazepam, all that stuff. So, those are sort of the big ones that, people are using that I think that they should try to get off if they can.
In America.
Yeah, Ambien in America. So, these medicines, sometimes they can leave you, really groggy in the morning. A lot of people, say to me too that they just don't work. Like, they'll get, 1 or 2 hours of sleep, and then they'll have to take like another pill, something like that. So some people aren't even getting that much relief from them. So, in general, we don't really have the best medications, the best pharmaceuticals right now for sleep, so there's definitely an opportunity for the cannabis industry to jump in on that, because, as I just stated, like a lot of the medicines just aren't very, very effective or very safe. Cannabis though, the CBD and THC, and again we'll talk about them one by one. There is a small group of patients that find that CBD does help them to sleep. And by small group, like I think I polled it on my Twitter fairly recently, and I think 15% of the people said that they use CBD to sleep. So not like a high percentage. So most people do use a little bit of THC to sleep at night. But that being said, again, like if you have an aversion to THC, some people do find CBD to be helpful. And I know there was at least one case studies done on 11 patients using CBD, and I think 10 out of the 11 reported a reduction in nightmares with the use of CBD. But if you do want to reduce your nightmares, THC is the one that really helps reduce nightmares. And some people will say to me, yeah, but don't you reduce your REM sleep? And I had a conversation with Dr. Ethan Russo on email recently, and he indicated that the incremental reduction in the REM sleep from THC is basically completely benign. Right. So we don't have. So a lot of people are worried. Am I going to lose all my REM sleep when you use THC? Well, you have at least one of, if not the best, medical cannabis expert in the world saying to you that it's benign. Use your THC if you need to sleep, basically, right?
Well, yeah, and I think with the pharmaceuticals, and you can maybe attest to this, do they not stop naturally occurring chemicals that we need to help put us to sleep? They're kind of replacing that in a way, and that could be detrimental over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to talk about each one specifically, like one by one. But I think the most important one to talk about would probably be the benzodiazepines, just because like those are the ones that have the most addictive potential, in my opinion, out of the big three we kind of talked about. And also too, I mean, the side effects of benzodiazepines can be pretty severe, and just like lethargy, fatigue, like poor cognition, brain fog. There's a lot of things that can happen when you're using benzos. And just coming back again to like how you might use THC and CBD for sleep at night. So again, you might get away with using CBD, but like again, it's a small percentage of those people. And if you were to try it, my suggestion would be to really look at the terpene profile and get something high in myrcene, and maybe a real high myrcene CBD dose might do it for you if your insomnia is not too bad. You're not getting too many nightmares and things like that. But again, a lot of people do use THC along with the CBD. So obviously you can use it in combination with the THC, or you can use it on its own, and you can use it in different ratios with THC and CBD. So some people, find that, a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio is better. Some people find like a 1-to-1. If someone's just starting off on cannabis and they're really afraid of having like any type of psychoactive effect, oftentimes I will prescribe like a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, just because I really don't want them to have a psychoactive effect that kind of turns them off from the medicine. But if someone is not really afraid of having like a little bit of a psychoactive effect, I think it's pretty reasonable to start someone out on a low dose of THC. That can be anywhere from like 5 to 10 milligrams. If you want to start really low, generally speaking, people don't get too much psychoactivity going less than 3 milligrams. And that's why there's a lot of they call them microdose capsules. Some people do, but 2.5 milligrams of THC. And the reports that I get from people, I know that there's at least one study that shows that people haven't reported any psychoactive effects with that. So that's a good starting dose. You don't want any psychoactivity. But if you're willing to accept that there's going to be something, 5 to 10 milligrams, I think is pretty reasonable. And just on that note, of psychoactivity, because I think it's important to talk about that word a little bit. Right. Yeah. Because
please do. Yeah. Because I'm sure there's people that are confused. Sometimes I get a little confused and I think I have a handle on it, but
and I need to, learn more about this too. But like, for instance, like caffeine is psychoactive, right? Meaning like anyone in the world, after you have, a cup of coffee, you had a cup of coffee, right? Like something triggered in your brain. The caffeine is psychoactive, right? So, CBD is in fact psychoactive, and I'm happy that you're kind of giving me the opportunity to correct this, because I did make this mistake on the Joe Rogan podcast. I did say that it was non-psychoactive, so I am making that correction today. So it is psychoactive, but it's psychoactive in the fact that it just changes your mental state, like caffeine can change your mental state.
Right.
It's not making you high like THC can.
Right.
So I just want to make that distinction today.
Boom.
So
Put that stake in the sand.
Yeah, man.
So how many, if we're touching upon the benzos, the sleeping pills, the opiates, if somebody were to walk into your office and say, I am on a really high dose of Adderall and Xanax and then something to go to sleep with, would you start them on a regimen to be able to wean them off of those pills using cannabis, using CBD or THC, or a combination of both? And if you would, like how could that look for somebody who's out there maybe struggling right now, looking for an alternative instead of, possibly getting on methadone or Suboxone and those types of things?
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, if you're on that road and like you're already on, 3 or 4 medicines, and, you mentioned Adderall, and then you mentioned, sorry, what was the second one, Dan?
Xanax, yeah,
and
benzo,
and then
maybe even an opiate. Like
as, something like that. Like, so, you should recognize like at that point that like, okay, like I'm taking 3 heavy medications here. Like maybe I should reflect on like, what's happening here? Like, what am I putting into my body? So I think that's like, step one, number one is like I can help, but the patient needs to be self-aware. And without that self-awareness, it's going to be really difficult for me to help that patient.
Right.
It's not that I'm not unwilling to help them. It's not that I can't help them. But if that patient doesn't have any self-awareness, if they're not reflecting on their day, if they don't know their medicines, it's going to be really, really difficult for me to help them.
Right.
I think that's a reasonable thing for me to say.
Extremely reasonable. Right? Yeah. I mean,
so, but getting back to your question, so once, they've kind of developed that little bit of self-awareness, oftentimes I try to use CBD in the day. I try to minimize the THC use during the daytime, depending upon the particular patient. There's some people who absolutely just need a little bit of THC in the day, and sometimes they maybe only need it for very short periods.
Right.
But in general, CBD is something that I like to use during the day because I've talked about this before, but it decreases. It was done in mice, but they've shown that it decreases learned fear, which is a pretty powerful statement, pretty powerful study, right?
Huge. Yeah.
And I mean, all this stuff that we have, like PTSD, anxiety, like that's all learned, right? Like the patients that I see. They're afraid to go to like the grocery store, right? And like no one's born afraid to go to the grocery store, right? Like sure, some people might be more predisposed to depression or anxiety than others, but like no one's born that way. Right. So like we learned all this stuff through trauma, through life experiences, through, traumatic events, what happened. You learned that like leaving your house and going to the grocery store, is a very, very stressful event,
right.
And for, guys who are veterans, it's almost like anything where there's like a ton of people, anytime where there's a crowd,
social
anxiety, like that signals like something bad's going on. You need to get out of here,
right.
And that's why they have these like panic attacks and, need to get out of the grocery store. Like that's a very common one is people say that like they leave their cart and the store, like, oh yeah, I went and then I just couldn't go up to the checkout line and, so I left. So, I think it's important to like, make a distinguishment between like, what cannabinoid you're trying to use and why you're trying to use it. So during the daytime, I'm really trying to get them out of their house. I've got a lot of guys with PTSD, with anxiety. They're not connecting with people. They're always inside their house all day, right? So that's my first goal is like, let's get over this fear. Let's get you out of your house, because again, like some of the guys are leaving, it's less than 10 days a month, right? So we need to fix that. Secondly is you need some type of routine. You know, everyone needs some type of routine. And if you don't sleep well, that's really going to make things difficult on you. You know, if you go to bed and you get up at the same time every day, like that's actually a pretty good indicator of your overall mental health. Like people who go to bed and get up at the same time every day, like it's a very good thing to have. It puts you in a routine. You know that when you get up in the morning, you're well rested and you can start your day. So, I think that's as important as almost like the medicine itself.
Right.
The cannabis is getting yourself in some type of routine. But in order to get people to sleep, and again, we just talked about it, so that's kind of my approach again. For the people who have a complete aversion to THC, CBD with high myrcene. People who have an aversion to THC, but they're still willing to try it. A 1-to-1 might be okay. And then if someone doesn't have any aversion, I think it's reasonable to start off on a little low dose of THC, and then that can help them, sleep at night and then get them into the routine again. So,
Right.
Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
No, that's perfect. And I want to make, I think I want to make like another distinction, and this is why I think I really hit it off when I was talking to you, because the things that we're talking about as far as THC, CBD, cannabis, it's a tool, right? It's a tool to be used. It can be abused, and it can be used to our advantage. Just like sleep. Sleep is a tool to recover, right? And when I get the sleep that I need, like for example, I'm at the end of this like 30-day mental health speaking tour, and stopping here in London and then continuing on back to Chicago. And I know tomorrow might be a little bit difficult, but I think like seeing my kids again for the first time in 3 weeks, and that love will push me through, and that energy that I get from them. But I mean, sleep is my pillar. Like if I don't have my sleep, then my day can easily go off the rails. Luckily for me, I have an hourly check-in, sometimes every half hour, sometimes every 5 minutes. And I check in with myself. So the first thing I do in the morning is I practice meditation. So I sit down with myself. That's a tool too. I think that what we've done in this society is relied too heavily on somebody else to tell us what to do. When part of my morning routine is sitting alone with myself, and really started doing this again 9 months ago. Got introduced to it almost 10 years ago when I was 25 in my career. But in doing that, in understanding like, I only got 6 hours last night. So I sit with my brain and I just view my thoughts. Like no judgment, just awareness. So I'm already in the morning aware that man, I wish I got 7 hours or 8 hours, right? So I'm a little bit more patient with myself. I'm a little bit more patient with my kids, because if I'm not aware of that, then I move into my day. As soon as I sit on my phone or I get on my emails, I'm anxious, right? I'm just trying to go too fast for me. And so like meditation for me as a tool to assess how I'm doing in the morning is the most important thing that I do. And I can do that anywhere. Right?
Yes.
It's beautiful. And it's not waking up, and even though I love my CBD and I do break my fast most days with CBD and the 6 mushroom blend, that's the first thing that I use as this tool to assess how I feel. And some days I don't take the CBD. And I think that's really important. I think it's a good lesson for people to understand, is like creating this relationship with yourself is really when my recovery started to excel, because like you said, I mean, it really is the way that we view our relationship to these things, right? And the perspective that we have. Because if I'm coming to you, putting all of my faith in you without really understanding that I need help, and like admitting that my life is unmanageable, I mean, anything you do or prescribe to me is in my opinion, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? Well,
it's like, there you have it, folks. This is someone who has healed. They've reflected on themselves, and that's why they're so much better. So it's that like self-reflection. But I'm glad that we're talking about this, because this brings up actually several good points. Because your morning routine, I think, is so critical for your mental health. I think it's, just as important almost as sleep at night. I put sleep as, number one. But, your morning routine is critically important. So, something I do every morning, it may not work for everyone, but, I'll just share it today because we're talking about this. So
100 push-ups? Or?
I use something called the 5-minute journal, actually.
Okay, nice.
So it's teaching yourself to be grateful. So every morning I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll think of like a person or like a relationship. Sometimes I'll try and think of like something that like happened like yesterday. Oftentimes too, I'll try and think of like something that I'm grateful for now that like we take like for granted. So like even just things like running water. Like when was the last time you like actually like, touched your heart and like just like thought about like how amazing it is to have like running water.
Right.
You know what I mean? We just like take that for granted. We just turn on the tap.
Right.
So that's the way I sort of approach it. And then there's 3 things you're supposed to write down that is going to make the day great. So, I'm going to do this, going to do that, going to do whatever, whatever it is, it could be, smile more, it could be like, reach out to someone that, maybe you haven't, reached out to in a while. It could be, or it could be, just something that you wanted to, do for somebody at work,
Right.
So, and then there's 2 affirmations, like I am this, I am that. So, write down whatever it is that you want to be and then be that. And like, I know that sounds so simplistic because it is, but it's really like a good mindset to have. And like, what is your other option really? Right?
Well, it's to go through your day unmindful of that you're anxious and that you're not fully present in the moment. And I'm glad that you mentioned this gratitude list, because I learned that when I was back in 25. We did this Indian sweat lodge, and it's tough to do. And we were in there with a bunch of girls, and girls have these natural endorphins that release pain. Men don't. So the girls are just cruising. They're just sitting there, sweating. Well, this is cool. And the boys were like on the floor trying to suck the cold air from the bottom. Yeah. And we got to the 3rd round, and a bunch of guys quit, and I was still in there. And Bear, this shaman, who's 92 years old, Purple Heart, like pretty legit dude. And he said, okay, this round we're going to make a gratitude list, and we're going to go around, and everybody's going to say what they're grateful for. And what happened, and what I found myself doing, was I was sitting there thinking of how grateful I was that I was still alive, that I had a roof over my head, and that I had a car, and these relationships were mendable, that are almost fractured or not quite broken. And I totally forgot about the suffering. I totally forgot about the pain, that I was in this hot sweat box, totally dark, couldn't see my hand in front of totally dissipated. So then it goes back to this morning routine where it's,
what are you concentrating on?
Yeah, and I'm anxious, right? Like yesterday, man, I mean, I left Montreal. I've been charging this month, but I left there. I got to, Toronto Life to do this interview after a 6-hour drive, and I could just tell my mind was everywhere. So I had to take a moment. I took a moment. I don't have the ability to maybe meditate for 10 minutes. I have the ability to make this list, hold these thoughts, and say it as a mantra as I'm sitting there for 5 minutes waiting for Malcolm to come in before our interview started, to get my mind in the right space. We all have the ability to, and that's why I say sometimes it's a 5-minute check-in, sometimes it's every 30, sometimes it's every hour, sometimes time dilates because I'm so in the moment.
That's a choice you made though too.
Total choice.
Like you could have chose to focus on all the bullshit that happened, but instead you chose to focus on all the things that you're grateful for in your life.
Right.
And that's the thing, is you can do that anytime.
Right.
It doesn't matter, if you're in Montreal or London, Ontario, or St. John's, Newfoundland, right?
You can do it.
You can always do that.
Yeah.
So, that's like the beauty of it. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, like how powerful their mind is. It's like actually you can choose to focus on
Right.
what's grateful. You're just not doing it.
Yeah.
And then you just make it a habit.
Right.
And then like you get up and brush your teeth in the morning. Well, I hope the people are listening brush your teeth in the morning. Like when you have something bad that happens, you just automatically go to that list. Like that's like your default.
Right.
And
I mean, this brings me to like my next point. So people are out there probably like I would have been 9 months ago, like either in a depressive state or waking up with anxiety saying, yeah, right. Like, what, positive thinking really works? Well, no, I'm here to say positive thinking really works. We've already done studies on the brain, and we know that the brain cannot distinguish between an event, a happy event that we're actually taking part in, and then thinking about that same event. And if you don't want to believe that, right, the same chemicals in your brain, the dopamine, the serotonin, the happy chemicals, they're created. Either you're doing it or you're just thinking about it. So positive thinking really works. And then on top of that, now they have this magnetography machine.
Okay.
No leads. So nothing touching your body. Guess where it sits? Right atop your head.
Okay.
Doesn't touch your body. Guess what it measures? The magnetic waves of our thoughts. Going up.
I've never heard of this technology.
Magnetography. Okay. Magnetography machine. And some of these hospitals have it. So if they're measuring the magnetic waves that go up,
right?
We talk about positive thinking. We talk about manifesting your own destiny. You talk about like the secrets. You talk about like the 4 agreements and all this stuff that people dismiss. And now it's real.
And people like Conor McGregor and that, like they talk about it too, like all the time.
All the time. And it's true. If we're like, my belief is we're all energy.
Yeah.
And energy really, it doesn't go anywhere, does it? Right? Yeah. So we're infinite. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but I've seen it. I've been a part of it, like in Peru specifically with ayahuasca and with psilocybin. And in no way it took my fear of death away, right? To the point where like, that's how profound these experiences were for me. And I have no fear. None of dying. And it might sound really crazy, but when I think about like something bad might happen to me or my family, I have this overwhelming understanding or feeling that if that does happen, then, and it might be cliche to say, it happens for a reason. And I number one, I can't really control that. I do my best to mitigate that. Mm-hmm. And if that did happen, I know where they are and I know that they're still surrounding me, still guiding me, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, to be able to feel that and then live this life that way, whereas up to 9 months ago, from 16 to 35, I was fighting everybody and everything, and I needed to control everything, and I thought everybody was out to get me, and that I was so fearful of death, and I was fearful of my kids dying and my wife, it overtook, it consumed most of my thoughts during the day, and you can't live in the present moment when you're too far into the future,
Yeah.
And I mean, that's really where anxiety lives, is for me, it's when I was worrying about things in the past that I couldn't change.
Yeah.
Or I'm too far into the future worrying about things that didn't even happen yet.
Yeah.
Just think about that.
It's that thing, like, that quote where people say, depressed people live in the past, anxious people live in the future, and happy people live in the moment.
Right.
But I mean, it's true. Like depressed people do try to like relive things instead of just creating something new, because creating something new is really what's gonna make you happy and put you in the moment.
Right.
And then people worry about the future, and that's a good point to bring up too, like when you were talking about the brain and how it can't tell the difference between you fabricating the event or the actual event. Well, just think about all the times you like gave yourself a panic attack or gave yourself anxiety. Like, was that anxiety or panic attack real? Hell yeah, it was. But like, was it something that needed to happen? Like, did the event make it happen? No, you made it happen.
Right.
Your brain made it happen. Right. So like, if your brain can do all these bad things too, like, why don't you think that your brain can do all these like positive and good things?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make like any sense at all.
And that's a tool. Like what we're talking about, like meditation is a tool. And if people are listening to this, like, well, how do I learn how to meditate? Well, the book I read was The Joy of Living by Yogi Mingyur Rinpoche. And it was amazing. And you can meditate off of sound, smell, what you see, what you touch, right? These mantras, breath, following the breath. And like, for anybody listening who just wants to get started, I mean, something as simple as taking your focus or your attention to your breath. We have 30 to 80,000 thoughts a day. You hear a bunch of different calculations from a bunch of different people, but on average, 30, 80,000. So I think, taking some time to understand that you don't need to put an emotion to every one of those thoughts that you have. And again, just creating this relationship with yourself by focusing on your breath. Your attention goes away. Take a snapshot of that thought. If it's a strawberry, don't be like, wow, did it fall off the truck? Did it come from which patch did it get picked up? Who picked it? And what is it? No, you take this snapshot and you let it fly away in the wind. Right. Yeah. And if you find yourself going down that path to where it came from or where the patch is, then just bring your attention back to your breath. It's literally that easy.
Yeah.
You know?
And what you're doing then is like you're making yourself the observer, and you can do that with like everything, because people always wonder, like, why do we give better advice to people that, we don't give to ourselves, right?
Right.
And it's because you're observing that other person. But when it's like yourself, for whatever reason, like we're not good at, self-reflection because we're not honest with ourselves and we don't like observe ourselves. But if you have like the mindset that you have just then you kind of adopt that like observer mindset, so you can observe your emotions almost like you're a different person because you're trying to separate yourself. And then that gives you a better perspective.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you're in these conversations with your wife, with your kids, might be the end of the day, end of the night. I see myself now. I'm like, oh boy. I'm like, you're getting a little brewed up here. Yeah. Let's just, take a breath, or walk into the other room, or you're in a conversation with your wife and she's starting to say, and I find myself pulling myself out and just sitting here and be like, no, just being aware. Oh, it's starting to rumble. And usually trying to diffuse the situation now instead of just jumping down the throat. And luckily now I have that ability because of the tools that I've been using and the medicine that I've been using to be able to, make that distinction of when that's happening. Because it's like total awareness. If you have total awareness, especially with yourself, with myself specifically, then I have these closer relationships now with my kids, with my wife, with my brothers, with my mom, with my dad. It's like I started loving myself and changing that narrative. And it really did start, number one, with a macro dose of psilocybin, but then number two, with farming my own CBD, and everything changed. Like, and it wasn't quick. That's one thing that I want to get across. Like the stuff that we're talking about doing, it is difficult. It's not difficult. Reaching for a daily pill to minimize symptoms, right? Yeah. We're getting to the root cause of what's going on, and then always reflecting. And it's not tiring, because once you get it and once you do it for a while and then you pull yourself out of a certain conversation, like, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah.
You're actually like, you impress yourself, and
it's, and when you have that feeling, it's really powerful, right? Because it felt like you did something that, you didn't think that you could do before, or you didn't see yourself doing.
Right.
But, when you like see yourself doing something that you never thought yourself, you didn't think that you could ever do, that's when you kind of feel like your best. And that's what gives you momentum,
right.
though.
And then you get empowered.
Right? Because then you're like, holy shit, if I can do this, well, what else can I do? And you just get momentum, right? And just kind of goes one after another. But I did want to talk just a second too about the breath and when you get that feeling. Just because I do admit I haven't been quite as consistent like with it lately, but I do something called heart rate variability training, which is my form of meditation. It's basically like an app on your phone, and it measures it does measure your heart rate on the app, but it measures the space between your beats.
You want to give them a plug? What app is it?
So it's Inner Heart Math Balance.
Okay.
I think it's called.
Inner Heart Math Balance.
And it is awesome. But so what do I do if I kind of feel that like anxious feeling? I go and do a real big deep belly breath, because that's how I practice my breathing in the morning. when I am consistent with it. I am very consistent with the 5-minute journal. I'm very consistent with the Stoic book that I read, the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And actually, I was going to talk about that too in a minute, just because you made
Please
so
do.
many like Stoic quotes earlier. I thought, I don't even know if you were realizing it,
No, I mean,
But
I'd love to hear about the book for sure, man.
But yeah, I just wanted to mention the point about breathing, and like that is a good technique, and you should have some type of relationship, like you said,
Right.
with your body and with your breath. Because if you don't, you're really missing out. You're not using like a super powerful tool.
Right.
Like if you are not using your breath to your advantage, you're missing out
For sure.
like big time.
And
So
you could
like,
regulate the heart rate variability, which is what
Yes.
you mentioned before. So when you feel yourself aware, again, number one, be aware. Number two, you're brewing, then you could move into exactly what you're talking about, right?
yeah, and the better you get at it, like the less anxiety you're going to have. And it can even improve physical performance in sports, they say too. So
Yeah.
there's some
The
evidence for
autonomic
that.
system?
Yeah,
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
Yeah, like just using maybe energy at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Being more efficient with your energy.
I mean,
sometimes.
I just feel like, just... You know who taught me this was Paul Check. Paul Check.
Oh, yeah, Paul
I
Check.
met him fresh out of rehab. I think I was 23 or 24, and he put his hands. He just looked at me the way I was breathing, and he put his hands at the back of my ribs.
Yeah.
And I was all lung. I was just like, and if you do this at home and your hands are at the bottom of your rib cage and you don't feel your rib cage expanding on that in breath, then you're not breathing correctly, right? And so he showed me that, and then he showed me like a few Tai Chi, and then the other one was just standing in front. So my homework was standing in front of a mirror for the next month, just ensuring that my hand was going out and that I was breathing into my belly instead of these short lung breaths, right?
Okay.
And so I think that's a really good tool that could be utilized. But the deep belly breathing, the holotropic breath work, I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm meditating, you mentioned, I think you mentioned, what I do is like the waves. Some mornings I'll imagine waves coming in, crashing out. Or like when I first started, what was the easiest was 7 in, and then I doubled my breath out. So 14 out. And the reason you double your breath out is because the longer your breath out, the more relaxed you get. So, I mean, those are a couple different techniques that I've used like with really, really good success.
Yeah.
And I think it did help. I mean, during hockey, I had a mantra, and it was just no, 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 no.
Yeah.
When I felt myself getting brewed up,
Yeah.
But then eventually it was no, 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 no. And then eventually it was no, no. And then it was no. And then I didn't need no. I just was aware when I was starting to get brewed up, had the awareness. I knew I was going to hurt my team I was about to snap. So I would get off the ice, and that's how I kind of changed the trajectory of like how I reacted to things, because I was just so freaking emotional.
Yeah. And it probably prolonged your career too.
Yeah. I mean, when I found rehab at 25, I went, my last 5 years in the league, I went to the Stanley Cup Finals 4 times with 3 different teams. And
That's
I really,
insane.
and I don't think, I'm not special. Obviously, I'm not a superstar. But I
They
think
did have you playing with Kane and Hossa for a little bit.
yeah, they
though.
did a little
They
bit.
did?
Yeah, taser, they'd sprinkle taser in there, just for kicks, just for good. I mean, I remember this time in St. Louis, I was playing with Kaner, and somebody got smoked. I'm just like, please, I hope it's not Kaner. And then it was, and then I'm like, all right, I just hope it's not Reeves. And then it was Reeves. And you have to. You got to step up, and it was in St. Louis, and
He's a scary dude.
oh my gosh, I went to punch, and my thing was like, and he was obviously scouting me a little bit, but to throw something at your eyes. It wasn't necessarily to try to catch you, but just to get you off, so then I could grab and pull and try to get the first couple.
Yeah.
He caught it. He's just like, bam, fist in here, and he's just wiggling me around. I was like, oh my gosh, I just hope this guy doesn't end my career. Tried to go down as quick as possible, but with like where I want to kind of take the conversation is a little bit. I want to touch upon TBI. I want to touch upon like concussion, and then like the neuroprotectant, anti-inflammatory properties of CBD and THC as well. Do you believe that? I know in America it's a Schedule 1. Here in Canada it's a little bit different now. But do you believe that some of these athletes can benefit from taking the only patented neuroprotectant on earth as far as CBD goes for preventative measures and to regain some of their brain health?
Absolutely. So this is a real good question, and there's a few different things here that I want to talk about. So first of all, they've shown before that the Israelis have actually given CBD to soldiers before they've gone into war, because they felt that it's such a good neuroprotectant for the brain, right? And also, too, another point I want to make before I go further is that it's not just good for athletes; it can be good for regular people too.
Military veterans, first responders.
Because the second point I'm going to make is that talking about being good for your brain. So the Alzheimer's disease, right? So Alzheimer's disease is formed by these beta amyloid plaques, right, in your brain. So THC can actually inhibit the formation of those plaques, right? Of tau.
Huh.
There, yeah, man. So that's pretty powerful stuff, right? So we know that, and we know so many people are suffering with Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's isn't one of those diseases where it just affects the person. Affects the whole family, caregivers. Alzheimer's and it's an expensive disease again because it affects so many people.
I think over the lifetime of dementia, it's around $360,000 that prices incurred in America, maybe more here in Canada. And my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, so this hits home. It hits home for sure.
Yeah. So, when you have, like that kind of level of evidence indicating that both CBD and THC can be, effective for, brain health in various different ways, I think it's something that we should, take, really seriously. But, one of the other points that I wanted to mention was I know that there was a study done where they looked at people who had concussions, because you mentioned TBIs and athletes specifically. But again, you don't have to be an athlete to have a TBI. But they looked at people and their death rate and whether or not they had THC in their system or not. And they found that the people who had THC in their system had about 1/5 of the death rate, of their mortality rate, as the people who did not have THC in the system. And I should preface this by saying that these were patients who had sustained a TBI, a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
So, they looked retrospectively at these patients who had a TBI and found out, which ones were using THC or which ones had THC in the system, which ones didn't. And again, that's the stat that they found. It was almost about 5 times worse for the people who.
That's staggering.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Staggering.
Yeah, because
everyone should know that.
Right,
it's crazy.
And the leading, I think everybody should also know, the leading cause of death from traumatic brain injury is suicide, which makes what you just said that much more important, right? Yeah. And I can't understand, well, I do understand a little bit why we're in this kind of predicament, but the more and more studies, like what are you seeing on the THC, CBD side or cannabis side of studies? Like there's more and more coming out every day. Is there more information that people can look at? If there is, where can they look and find it?
Yeah. So, with regards to CBD, like there definitely are more and more studies coming out about it. To answer that question, I don't mean to be boring, but, just go to PubMed and type in CBD, just because, that everything there is like reputable.
Right.
If you want to find out, more specific, just type in CBD anxiety, type in CBD PTSD, and you'll find some studies there and you can find some information. It might be, a little bit tedious, but it's definitely a really good resource. If you are into the articles, there is a website called Healthline, and they do stuff. They have done some articles on CBD, but there's primarily on like nutrition and fitness and that type of thing, which kind of lends in the CBD world a little bit. But yeah, they've got some great articles on CBD. If you don't want to go to, which I completely understand, go to PubMed and go through the nitty gritty scientific articles.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
But yeah, I know that there are more and more studies coming out. And one actually that I'm really excited about that's coming is I know that they're doing a study now on CBD with exposure therapy.
Okay.
Because like I always say to my patients, you know, like CBD decreases learned fear. Like go do exposure therapy on your own though. Like if you're afraid of the mall, go to the mall. Like if you're afraid of the grocery store, go to the grocery store.
And that's
like,
what you mean by exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you do it, you know, gradually, right? So like some people, maybe the first time, maybe the first 10 times, they have to go to the grocery store with someone else. And maybe they only go 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
That's fine. As long as you're making progress. And that's another important point. As long as you're making progress, don't look at the other person. Doesn't matter, you know, whether you're at the top or whether you're at the bottom. As soon as you start looking at other people, you're taking, you know, focus off yourself, thoughts off yourself that, you know, you could be using to better yourself. But instead you're focusing those thoughts on other people.
Desires and expectations on other people. You've never walked a day in their shoes, but you want to make yourself anxious about, you know, these made up stories. It's those made up stories that we tell ourselves again, you know? So I think that's a really important distinction. For sure. Curb
your desires. You don't want to have too many of them.
No, man. Minimalistic. I've learned the hard way, you know, to minimize and without these expectations and without these desires, people think, well, you're just a lay down type of guy, right? Well, no. I mean, you still have your principles and you still, you just don't have these unreachable type of goals, you know, like I was talking to a hockey team the other day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what if coaches in hockey just created an environment where all the players had to do is come to the rink and they created this environment that harbors happiness. The happier you are, the more creative you are.
For sure.
The more creative you are, the happier you are.
Paul Stamets said that.
Exactly, on the Joe Rogan. And then it's like, if that's the case, then why the fear-based learning? Why do we still do that, specifically in hockey, you know? And so like the GM was there, he's sitting back and I'm like, well, what if, like what would happen? What would happen if you did the exact opposite of what the Sutter brothers do, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's done that yet. You know, I don't think anybody's tried it yet. So it would be an interesting little experiment. If there's any NHL coaches out there listening, then maybe harbor that type of environment, or especially junior coaches, especially when you're dealing with minors, right?
Yeah.
All you got to do is come to the rink and be happy to get here.
Yeah.
You know? You'd have guys racing into the room. And then obviously it's like, well, what about, there's still accountability.
Because they think is they're not going to be tough. But you get the toughness with like the discipline. And you don't have to be like, you can still create the environment that you said as long as you made them disciplined.
And there's still accountability.
Yeah.
You still show up on time, right? There's certain work ethic goal marks that you have to hit. Like that stuff's easy to construct. But like just the environment. Imagine you have guys racing there instead of guys racing to get out of there, right? Not walking on eggshells. Communication. They actually want to talk. Open the lines of communication to the coaches, teammates. You know, I just think, I really feel deep down in my heart that will be the way in 10 years, but I'm hoping that it happens sooner. You know? Yeah.
Well, I think there's definitely a good change going on, and you know, people like yourself, like you know, speaking out about it, are definitely, you know, making that change. You know, I think, you know, maybe you're right. It'd probably be, you know, 10 years before, you know, a lot of these changes are really implemented. But you know, the more we talk about it, the faster it'll happen. So.
Yeah, and I think like making these changes with young kids too, right? So I think starting with them, it's like it's the old adage. I don't want to say it's too late for NHL guys, but if you start working with them and then go down, it doesn't work. If you start working with the younger kids, create that environment right away so that they're going up in it, then they know their worth, right? And they know how amazing they can be with being happy and with being creative. And that's the thing. It's like hockey players are amazing individuals because the sport inherently, you're going to suffer. You know, you're going to get the puck off the toe. You're going to get hit. You're going to get the shoulder off the glass. It's going to come back and smack you in the face. Like that stuff is built into the game. Yeah. It's the unnecessary suffering that I have a problem with. And then it's also the distinction between suffering and failure. You know, do you need suffering? Maybe. Yeah. You know, but can you learn from your failures all the time? 100%. know, 100%. So, there's, 9 months ago when I started using, not only CBD with mushrooms, I also started off on psychedelics, on a hero dose of psilocybin. That basically the science out there, the people that are looking for it, shuts down your default mode network, which is where I kind of hold my sense of self and all of these destructive thought patterns and my perception of the world. And it came in and just started creating all of these new pathways for me. And then I kept up maintenance with a microdose, and then I also kept up with flushing out the inflammation, promoting the neurogenesis, strengthening the myelin sheath with CBD, specifically solventless CBD, solventless processing.
Okay.
No, a full spectrum.
Okay.
And maybe that's a good place after this, is like to distinguish between the full spectrum and broad spectrum and isolates, and use that like with great success up until this point. 9-month mark. At the 6-month mark, checked my blood, got a QEEG. And I mention this because I think that's a really, in a traditional setting with somebody that you trust, and now in these clinical settings for anybody looking for this type of information, go to Johns Hopkins, NYU, Imperial College of London, University of Toronto is doing a microdose study. I think it's really important to just lay out all the options.
There's two, common ones that I know. So one is from Paul Stamets and one is from James Fadiman. So those are the two that I think are most known.
Right.
So again, when I'm talking now, like, I am talking as a scientist, but, I'm not talking, giving like medical advice.
Right.
But, so people know what those protocols are. So the Paul Stamets one, he recommends microdosing 4 days a week, 1 and 3 days off. So the dose he recommends is 100 micrograms of psilocybin. And then he also recommends stacking it with niacin, somewhere between 500 to 1,000 milligrams, I think is what he says. A lot of people struggle with the niacin flush.
It's a little uncomfortable.
It can be uncomfortable. When I've taken niacin, it's never ever bothered me. I don't mind it, but you will get red. You will feel tingly. Like it will make you feel uncomfortable for at least 15 minutes. So, Paul stacks the psilocybin with the niacin and then also with lion's mane. So lion's mane, is basically, would probably be classified best as a nootropic, I would say.
Right.
But, it has been shown to be effective for, various different cognitive disorders, mostly in the elderly, but, people who don't have, a mental block or any type of cognitive decline can still benefit. So healthy people, students maybe still be able to benefit. So that's his protocol. Some people believe, Paul's one of these people too, where it's almost like a comparison of like, cannabinoids to mushrooms, and the fact that like, we need the whole entourage of cannabis to get the full effect.
Right.
So Paul, believes that, with mushrooms, with the psilocybin, and, in order to get its full effect, and in order for the other mushrooms, so when we're talking about lion's mane, reishi, chaga, turkey tail, all these different mushrooms, he believes that all those, may be synergistic as well.
Right.
And again, this is kind of, a non-scientific discussion on the fact that we, don't have studies to back this up, but we do certainly have lots of anecdotal evidence. And Paul's very smart, very intelligent
and if
guy.
people want to go check this out, he just dropped a new study on his Instagram. If you want to go to it, I think it's Paul Stamets on Instagram, about the 16 mushroom blend and their synergistic effects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's happening.
That's awesome. I gotta look at that
for sure.
And then the second protocol is by James Fadiman. So his is different. So his would be every third day, which a lot of people end up doing just twice a week, just because of the convenience sake. His dose is in between 0.3 and 0.5. So that might be too much for some people. You may find that you have like too much psychoactivity or too much of a psychoactive effect with that. But other people, may may desire that type of psychoactive effect. So if that's for you, maybe that one would be better. But again, this is not, medical advice per se. I'm just, readdressing or restating the protocols that are most popular about microdosing psilocybin mushrooms.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, with the THC being shown to break up those tau proteins, they've also done, I think, Paul calls it translational medicine, where it's they were the mice trials, and they gave them concussions, they gave them TBIs, they produced this tau protein, actually injected it into them, and then some of these mushrooms have been shown to break up that tau protein. So I mean, it's really quite amazing. I mean, what they're using, they've used these mushrooms for thousands of years in Asia to stave off dementia, stave off Alzheimer's. So it's just, for me personally, a guy who Alzheimer's obviously runs in my family, with my grandmother passing from it, and then her 3 siblings. And then now I'm in probably the highest risk population with my history of repetitive head trauma, because 3 or more traumatic brain injuries and you're 80% more susceptible to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, Lewy body dementia, ALS, and CTE. So I've got to be really, really diligent in what I do and what I take. And that's why I bring this stuff up, because for me, the last 9 months, turning to CBD, turning to the medicinal mushrooms, as well as psilocybin, I've never felt better in my life. So I guess we'll take the conversation down another avenue. I think some of the biggest confusion for people is full spectrum, broad spectrum, and then isolate. Okay. So can we kind of delve into those 3 avenues? And
Let's get into it. Let's get into it.
Flush it. Yeah.
All right.
Let's flush out first and foremost what I personally think is, we talk about the Entourage Effect, the full spectrum.
Okay. All right. I think the best way is maybe break up the difference between CBD from cannabis and hemp.
Right.
And then we'll talk about the isolate.
Cool.
So cannabis, anything above 0.3% THC is considered to be cannabis. Mm-hmm. Anything below 0.3% is considered to be hemp. Mm-hmm. So they both come from the same species, right? They both come from Cannabis indica, Cannabis sativa. Although they say that hemp only comes from the sativa type, which is kind of interesting. But and another conversation is we're kind of getting away from using the terms indica and sativa. They're kind of old school terms that don't explain anything scientific.
And most of the stuff's hybrid anyway. Right?
So anyways, so when you have, cannabis, or, as people say, did that CBD oil come from hemp? Did it come from cannabis? So, if it came from cannabis, possibly in the CBD oil, there could be a little bit more THC, right? It can still be considered, a high CBD oil by most people's standards, say if it's 20 milligrams of CBD and 2 milligrams of THC, something like that. But that in that case that, that CBD probably came from cannabis just because it has that THC level. If you have like something that's like hemp, it's called full spectrum hemp, so that's coming from hemp. Hemp that has less than 0.3% THC. So hemp is cannabis, it just has less than 0.3% THC. So it's the same thing almost, right? You're just not going to have as much THC in the hemp product, likely, right? But talking about the Entourage Effect, so Dr. Ethan Russo, my second time bringing this guy's name up, but he coined this term Entourage Effect. So he thinks that all the cannabinoids and all the terpenes work synergistically together, like I was just talking about with the mushrooms, and that you need all of them on board to get the best effect for various different disorders, right? So that's where the Entourage Effect seems to come into play. And then the last thing is CBD isolate. So people have, broken down CBD where it's basically just like a rock of crystal, right? And it's just pure CBD isolate. So there's nothing else in it. So, people say, CBD from hemp, from cannabis, different. CBD is CBD is CBD. It's the same molecule, right? But if you have CBD isolate, then yes, you're not going to get all of the other effects from the cannabinoids and terpenes and things like that are contained within the plant. But that being said, some people do say that they respond to the isolate. Like in my like to my knowledge, I don't think there's any studies out there like comparing like CBD isolate on anxiety versus like CBD, on hemp versus CBD that's made from cannabis.
Right.
I don't think there's any studies on that out there, but I can say that some people have found CBD isolate to be effective, and I can obviously see that because again, CBD is CBD. So what CBD is going to do, it's going to do with just CBD only, but will it do some other things potentially that it's not doing because it doesn't have all those other cannabinoids and terpenes?
Right.
Maybe. And the other thing is too is maybe it's just the other cannabinoids and terpenes that are doing its own thing,
right,
that are with the CBD. So it's not really like this synergistic effect where we're all working together. It's just that they're all doing something a little bit different and they're all providing some type of benefit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the best way to break that down, the best example that I've heard is from Riley Cote, and he said, what would you rather have? If I can give you a whole orange, or I can give you just the vitamin C, and he said the vitamin C would be mostly closely related to the CBD isolate. You're just isolating one compound out of this orange, right? And I mean, personally, give me the whole freaking orange.
Yeah.
Instead of the vitamin C pills. Yeah.
And I like that. I like that analogy. So shout out to Riley for that.
You can steal it. Yeah, for sure. Shout out to Riles. Yeah.
Actually, I just recorded a podcast with him too.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So you're making the rounds.
Yeah. Hopefully that'll be out soon too.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm gonna do one. Well, we did one, but I think he wants to redo it. So
cool.
We'll hit that, I guess, here soon.
Sick, man.
So what else? Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Obviously, we touched upon a lot of things. Do you have anything going on that the people out there should know about or be aware of? Or where can they find you? Where can they find your clinic?
Sure. Yeah. Super appreciate that. So I do have a new website out now. So, happy to announce that. MikeHartMD.com. I'm actually, I'll announce it now too. So in about a month or so, I'm going to be launching my own podcast. So
nice.
I'll definitely be having you
reciprocate.
Yeah, brother, for sure. So that's something I think that's it's pretty exciting. I'm cool. Excited to get a lot of people on board for that. I think Elias is going to come on, who I think you may have met before.
Yeah.
I have that coming out, and if you can follow me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, just at Dr. Mike Hart on all of them. So it's DrMikeHart. So I try and post something almost every day. And I've got a few different podcasts out there. I have done one with Joe Rogan. So if you want to check out that, it's 3 hours long. It's mostly
what was it, number 1246, if my memory.
Good memory.
Yeah, buddy.
Must be the mushrooms.
Must be the lion's mane. Yeah, man.
That's
I love
cool.
that mane.
Yeah, man. The mane is good.
Oh, I mean, it's just helped with so many things. It's almost unbelievable the transformation that I've made from 9 months ago to today. It really is. And people are like, how do you feel? Are you 100%? I'm like, no. I'm better than 100%. So I don't know if it's like this extensive damage that was done to me and to my brain that I keep recovering, or if I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life and every day is going to be better than the next. I'm hoping it's the latter, but I guess, only time will tell.
I don't want to delve into too deep of a subject as we close out, but there is something called post-traumatic growth.
Okay.
So some people, they experience a traumatic event and they get weaker, but some people, for whatever reason, they experience a traumatic event and they get stronger. So if you do have a traumatic event, just think that there was someone else that were in your shoes, maybe even worse shoes, and they made it out, and you can too if you just have that post-traumatic growth attitude.
Boom. Post-traumatic growth.
That's right. Post-traumatic growth.
I fucking love that, man.
Hell yeah.
All right, we'll end on that.
Let's end on that. I like that.
Cool, buddy. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time. I'm going to continue back on in Chicago, and just let me know when I need to be back, and we'll hammer your podcast.
Awesome, man.
Cool,
we'll be in touch. Appreciate it,
thanks,
brother.
Man.